Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is a designer who's done his fair share of everything over the years. He's gone from playing Axis and Allies to being consumed by Games Workshop, winning countless tournaments and eventually working for the company. As a designer, he's most well known for Flamme Rouge, but has also designed A Tale of Pirates and Copenhagen, among many others. My guest this week is Asger Granerud. Asger, thank you for coming into the cabin.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, first question I need to ask you, before I ask you my usual one. So on Flamme Rouge, it says Asger Sams Granerud, and on every other game it says Asger Harding Granerud. What's the difference?
Actually, on the most recent copies of Flamme Rouge, it does say Asger Harding Granerud. So the difference is that I got married in between the first print runs and the current ones. It's as simple as that.
So is this a weird Danish naming convention? You have 2 surnames?
2 surnames is quite common. It's not super common, but growing so that we found a compromise. So I took it's a mix. My wife also had 2 surnames, so we took one from me and one from her, and we then swapped them up. So we have the same name, but it's a combination of both.
So how does it feel changing your name? Do you feel like a different person now?
Not at all. Actually, there's something quite nice about it because it also shows. It's also this gesture of us belonging together, so to say. You can also, when you go to a hotel or similar, they will say it's a reservation for Mr. and Mrs. Harding Granerud, and it's the same name, not just one of us registered. It's not an important thing in the big picture, but yeah.
Well, it's interesting in Germany, and I was really surprised. I moved to Austria, then I moved to Germany, and then I was really interested that they have essentially in both of those countries a book. And if you have a kid and you want to give the kid a name, the name needs to be in the book. And if the name isn't in the book, you don't get to call your child by that name. Is that the same thing in Denmark?
I have no kids myself, but as far as I know, that is the same thing. However, it is a book that is drastically being opened up these years, as far as I'm understanding from my friends with kids. So there's more and more freedom being given to the parents to call the children what they want. But there is still a book of allowed names.
So going back then, how difficult was it for you to choose the 5 games that you were going to take to the cabin?
I've been pondering that question for quite a long time. I listened since episode 1 of 5 Games for Doomsday, and I'm a big fan of it. And so I've been thinking about it. And it's a mix of, it's been a long process of knowing some of the titles that I wanted to bring. And then there's been some hard choices. But eventually I went in and looked at my most played games and the games I rate 10 out of 10, and there are not that many. Some of them were a little similar, so I grouped them together and picked one over the other. So yeah, and I put some thought into the scenario as well of what I would like to bring with me into this future of a horrible zombie apocalypse or whatever it is we're fighting against, right? So yeah.
So this is practical and enjoyment factor. There's none of the nostalgic or sentimental about your choices then?
There is a little bit. My first choice is also a very personal choice. But in general, I think I'm maybe even too good at putting the past behind me. It doesn't take up too much of my considerations, I'd say.
And so your wife isn't a gamer, right? So in the cabin you'd be doing things other than gaming? What would you be getting up to apart from playing games?
That's a good question. Depends on whether or not there's still Netflix, etc. But we do play games together. So she is a gamer. She's not a gamer like I'm a gamer that plays hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, but she's definitely a gamer. And she's really taken to the app games as well. We can't play Kingdom Builder together anymore, or Ticket to Ride, because I think she's played in excess of 5,000 games of Kingdom Builder on the app, and probably 4,000 games or so of Ticket to Ride. So when I say we can't play it, that's of course wrong. We can play it, but there's just no point. I lose every single time we play. So yeah.
And so what are games for you? Are games, because I mean, as a designer, I guess your angle on games is slightly different. Are they objects to be treasured? Are they potential experiences to be mined? Are they areas of research for future things that you want to do?
I think at the core for me, they're actually just fun. I've been playing games since I was a child, and I still do today because I really, really like it. I have a game club. I'm fortunate enough to have a game club, a small group of friends of 10 to 15 people. We have a small room where we go play, and when I go there, I try not to bring work with me. That doesn't mean that we always succeed, and sometimes they're also happy to try out some of our new stuff, but I try not to bring it into that space, because I want to keep it as a space for me just playing games and enjoying games, which is what I tend to do there. So,
I mean, the more successful you become as a designer and the bigger publishers you end up working with, do you find that people are more amenable to trying out your prototypes?
I don't know if that's how it came about, but that's probably part of it. I think also just a year ago when I went full time, we also set up a more systematic testing group. So we invited people in. We said it's the first Friday and the third Friday of every month. There's beer and pizza. You can come every time. And it's from there to there. You can come and go when you want. So there was some regularity to it. And we've managed to build up a group that can do it there. We also test outside this group. In this group, it's only our games being tested. But we do also test. And when we do test outside, it's mainly with other designers, and their games are also on the table, etc. But we've managed to build that group. I don't know if it's because of some fame or if they know that game is going to be published by some designer. That might be part of it. It's actually not something we talked a lot about with the testers.
It's interesting because that's the first time I've heard mentioned, and I'm sure other people do it, but some sort of remuneration, even if it's just pizza and beer, for the playtesters. Do you think that's important? Do you think that, playtesters don't get any sort of, at the most, a name in the rule book? Do you think that playtesters are a part of the industry that should be remunerated in some way? A recognition that they're helping you do your job?
I think that would be fantastic. We try to do that little thing, but I think that it's actually secondary to creating a nice atmosphere where people feel welcome. And of course, also having a high enough productivity that when we do this every 2 weeks, that they actually get to try out new games and new variants and see that their suggestions or concerns are addressed, so they see some progress in it, even if they're playing the same games. I think that's, in our case, more paramount to people coming back and actually enjoying it. To the overall question, I think that it would be fantastic if there was some remuneration and even directly monetary. So, because it's impossible to make these games without lots and lots and lots of playtesters playing them. Thankfully, for a designer like myself, there's also lots of people like myself who really, really like games. And playtesting is an opportunity for them to try out new stuff and have also be part of that creative process. So I think that's probably part of what's drawing people in, more than, because there is no money involved. So of course, more than money.
I mean, do you see? I mean, you've been designing now for a few years, and you went full time a year ago. Have you seen a creeping professionalism in the industry in the time that you've been designing games, and attitudes towards development and playtesting and the way publishers treat you as a designer?
I think so, for sure. Not only are we seeing the big buyouts across the industry, which indicates that more money is coming in. Daniel and I, my co-designer, we also have tried to be quite systematic about the whole process, from idea selection to development and to pitching and thinking about it also as a product, not just as a game. Having that publisher's perspective on what we're making, because they are our first road customer. Of course, second would be they would then have to sell it to distributors, who then have to sell it to retailers, and who then have to sell it to the end user, the gamers. So none of this works without it appealing to the gamers at the end. But we still have to take that publisher perspective, because they are our first customer. I think that more and more money is coming into the business, and I've also experienced that the publishers are offering us better contracts and better conditions and terms, which for me thinks that there is some growing realization that what designers deliver is important, and they actually really want to also take that relationship seriously.
So, thinking now about the apocalypse and having to take these games with you, how much of a pain would it be for you to lose your game collection? Is your game collection precious to you, or would you be unconcerned if it went up in flames?
It's not precious to me. I'm not a collector. It's not many years ago that I got rid of my entire book collection, and now when I go out and buy a new book, once I'm done reading it, I gift it to a friend. And at the same time, I also got rid of all my old, or maybe even before that, all my old CD collections and music collections, etc. I'm not attached to things in that way. I am attached to gaming, so I would hate to miss those games, but I guess I would pick up some sticks and stones and start making some games to keep myself and others entertained.
So I want to go back to the beginning now. So you said you spent the majority of your first decade of life in Mozambique. Why were you there, and what are your sort of recollections about being in Africa at this time?
This was in the 80s and the early 90s. It was across two periods of time. My parents were working as development workers for initially some smaller Danish development organization that no one outside Denmark would know. And then later, my mom was the coordinator for one of these organizations, the country coordinator. My dad had on and off shifts for the UN and the embassy and other stuff also related to it. And I really enjoyed growing up there. And when you're a child and you move somewhere, you just take to it, right? And you pick up the language, you pick up the culture, and you go out and you start playing with the kids around you, right? So it's not a mystified thing for children. I like to think that it has brought some different perspectives to my also grown and adult life, that I now see the world with the eyes that everything doesn't have to be exactly like it is in the small neighborhood of Copenhagen where I grew up and still live today.
And so, but what was it like? Were you on a compound? Were you kept separate from the sort of the people of Mozambique, or were you did you have the freedom to go out and play with the local kids and learn about the local culture?
No compound, no nothing. I went to an international school, so that meant that I was going to school with ambassador kids and other people from all over the world. So of course there was much more money just in my own life and with my schoolmates' life. But back home we lived in a biro, a small, almost a village. But you could just go out and you can walk to the slums. It was a 10-minute walk to our housekeeper's place and where they lived. So it was basically right next door. There was a local school, and I had friends that basically lived on the street as a children, and we also from time to time took my parents took some of those in and tried to do their best to take care of them. Even people that still recognize me and me recognizing them when I came back like 15 years later. So it's been a fun. I've been more than once back, but it's been like a fun experience.
And what was it like to go back? Does experiencing that as a young kid make you conscious of the privilege that you have and how lucky you are? And did going back, was it a sobering experience? Was it a euphoric experience? Was it a strange experience?
I'm not even sure I put that much thought into it. I went back and saw friends and family, right? So, and places I knew, and some that had changed, and buildings that weren't there, and new buildings that were. I've always been conscious, I don't think I always have been conscious of privilege, but even when you grow up in a place like Mozambique, and it's one of the poorest countries in the world, you are very well aware that there's poverty all around you, and you are aware that you have strong privilege. And it's only something I've grown more aware of as life has proceeded, not just living there in a place where the distance between poor and rich is so big, but also just growing up in Denmark is a huge privilege. Free education. Actually, I get paid for my education, which I don't actively use anymore. So that's a risk that I haven't had to really live with, and a concern I haven't had to live with. Not to mention male and white privilege and whatever else there is around. Lots of these things has influenced me throughout my life in positive ways. I couldn't have gone full-time game design a year ago if it wasn't because we've been lucky enough to inherit some money, and we actually own the place we live. So that means that my monthly expenses are low enough that I don't have to worry about too much if a royalty check arrives in 3 months or in 6 months.
So you said earlier that you gamed sort of most of your life. When did games come into your life, and what were those games, and how did that develop as you grew older?
I think the first instances of it was definitely card games, different variants. They're called 500 and Casino, at least in Danish. And this was probably at around of age 6, 7, 8. And at the end of that period, 8, 9, chess also came into my life, and I played a lot of chess for years to come. My dad was an avid chess player, but that lasted until I think I was 12 or 13. And then we stopped playing chess because I always won. But then we were back in Denmark, and I think at 14 or 15, Magic came into my life for a few years. And then Warhammer, as you mentioned in the intro, took over more than a decade of my life.
And so what were the attitudes in Denmark towards gamers? Because we live in an age now where the nerd is sort of lauded and nerd culture is very popular. But when I grew up, when you played these sort of games, you came in, I never felt that I was particularly bullied, but you came in for a sort of certain element of ridicule. Was that the same sort of thing growing up in Denmark?
Sure, it wasn't socially accepted, like mainstream socially accepted to play these really geeky games. And even today, if you say you're playing Warhammer Fantasy and you're painting these little toy soldiers, etc., you will get an odd stare from most people. Even though it has moved to become more acceptable, I still think there is a stigma to it.
And how did you deal with that as a kid? Because, part of the reason I don't think I ever felt particularly bullied is because I had a resilient personality, and I could outwit people, and if they said mean things to them, I could say equally mean things, more mean things back, because I was quick and I was funny. What were you like as a child? Were you outgoing? Because I've met you and you seem a very outgoing, confident person. Were you like that as a kid, or was that something you developed into adulthood?
I think the confidence has always been there. My mom has said several times, I've got two siblings, that she's never understood how she's gotten three so confident kids. And I'm probably the most confident of the three of us. That doesn't mean I'm always right. I'm also aware that that's also a disadvantage, but it has definitely shielded me in those years. 9 times out of 10, I knew I was smarter than the kids trying to point fingers at whatever I was doing. And 9 times out of 10, those same kids in my school knew it as well, right? So, and not that stops bullying. That can actually make it worse, right? If you're actively one of the smarter kids. I'm not the smartest man around in the room, but I have been definitely in the top part of it in those schools, and of course that has actively decreased as I've moved on in life and into university, etc.
And so you said you moved on into GW and it became a sort of decade-long obsession, and you started competing in it. So firstly, it sounds to me, and you hear stories, it sounds like the most horrendous time possible, but what is the competitive Warhammer scene like?
It's fantastic, Ben. It's not absolutely amazing. Well, it's like any game, but it's a big, complicated game with a hobby, and you even have to, as we mentioned, you have to paint these models. So when you get people going to competitions, having fulfilled the accomplishment of actually painting a whole army, you are among gamers with one specific hobby that they really, really share with you, and everyone is in it together. So it's always been a great experience. Some of my best friends and best times have been in that environment and that community.
But the stories you hear are about people being, especially pedantic about the rules, and people having arguments about, moving an inch there, moving half an inch here. When it gets down to the cutting edge, it must be ultra competitive, no?
But that's not where the competitiveness starts. You're not trying to push an extra millimeter or half an inch here and there, and half an inch wouldn't fly when you're in the top of the competitive, because you can spot that at the snap of a finger. So it's of course there are stories. Of course it has happened that I've experienced stuff like that, but it's been the vast minority of cases, and it's not something that is overshadowing my experience of the times playing it.
So you said in your bio, so firstly, was it Warhammer Fantasy or Warhammer 40k or both?
Warhammer Fantasy. I've played everything Games Workshop, I think, almost. From Gorka Morka over Inquisitor and Epic and a number of systems that don't even exist more. But the thing that controlled my life was Warhammer Fantasy Battle.
And you said at one point that you were ranked among sort of some of the best players in the world. What makes a really excellent top-ranking Warhammer Fantasy player?
There are some basic skills involved in it. Of course, a lot of it is just playing it a lot. But I think that overall, also if you take what it takes to be really, really good at something else, I think, and I'm not saying this is true for everyone or everything, but I think that if you cannot stop analyzing what went wrong, even when you still wrote the 6 and 1, right? If you cannot stop your brain from thinking about what systems could be applied, then you're constantly working to improve myself. And I couldn't stop thinking about these things. I could easily shut my brain off from thinking about university, but I couldn't shut my brain off from thinking about Warhammer. So I constantly was working on self-improvement, even when there were like minuscule percentages and thinking about how can I manipulate that next time in a fluid system as it is with these measurements.
And so you haven't been a competitive Warhammer player for a long time now. Do you miss it? Is it something you'd like to maybe even think about going back to in the future?
Not really. I miss the friends, but I still see them at other social occasions because we've known each other so many years, and we've even traveled international on holidays together for some of these bigger tournaments. So not really. Talking about me selling off my books, etc. It's actually a much more emotional thing for me. But it's not more than 3 months ago that I sold off all my Warhammer. And by that I mean all my Warhammer. I picked up like one model from each army that I kept as a memory that I had painted. So I have a little bit left, but that's it. I got rid of it. I hadn't used it for 5 years, and most of it I hadn't used for 10 or 15, or some of it was even still in the original packaging, hadn't even been opened. So out it went.
And was that a wrench, or are you happy it's gone?
I'm very happy it's gone. I hope they spread joy somewhere else. They weren't doing me any good in my cellar. They were just taking up space. I'm not going to rule out going back into it, but if I do, then that must come from a point of passion again. So if I don't have the energy to actually collect and assemble and paint a new army, then I'm not really passionate about it. Of course, there's an easy cop-out. I could just borrow an army from one of my many friends who still have them.
So your first game, then, is from one of the great designers, and this is Schotten Totten. So firstly, why are you taking this one to the cabin?
It's a fantastic game. It's a game I've played, 50, 100 times, at least 50 and more. It's a game that my wife really enjoys playing as well. And despite having played it this 50 to 100 times, even now, I'm still finding nuances of play in it where I can optimize chances. This part of the brain, as I mentioned, that can't stop thinking about those aspects. And again, talking about my wife being a gamer, I think we're winning 50% each, but every time I introduce someone else to this game, I always beat them. Even when they have played it before. So it's a game with a lot of skill involved that doesn't show immediately on the surface when you play it. It can seem very random, etc. But it's I love it. Fantastic, simple system, lots of complexity, constant tension. You're forced to make choices about risking A or B or C. So it even has that small feel of some card-driven games, even Twilight Struggle or Our Own 13 Days, where you have that tension of, do I want to do A or B or C? Like you're presented with positive things, but also negative consequences. So in such a simple system, just numbers and with colors. Love it. Fantastic game.
We were speaking before we started recording, and I was talking about how I'm playing Knizia games at the moment, and I hadn't played them before. And what strikes me about Knizia is how he manages to make so much out of so little. How important do you think he is to modern gaming? And would gaming look anything like it does now without Reiner Knizia's influence?
That's I don't know for sure. I think gaming would probably look much like it is now, even without Reiner Knizia. That's not to take anything away from the amazing games he's made through the years, not at all. But I don't think that one company or one person really owns this movement, or maybe not even has drastically influenced it. I think that deck building would have come around even without Donald X. Vaccarino eventually, in a different guise, etc. And even so, it was there before, but just as the meta level of Magic the Gathering, not again to take anything away from that fantastic game. But I think it's a constant progress, and I don't think I'm gonna change the whole industry. Maybe some individuals can move the needle a little forward a little earlier than it would otherwise have done. But yeah.
And so when you play Knizia's games, I mean, has he influenced you as a designer in any way? Do you see parts of his games, even if not explicitly sort of in mechanics, but in maybe an ethos or an approach, affect the way you design?
Not something I have thought about in those terms. I wouldn't say so. I like the simplicity of it. I actually often find some of his games thematic, right? even though people think that they're very abstract. I like that core of theme really, really integrated into the simple mechanics that then have an abstraction of a story more than I like when theme is made explicit with an illustration and a fluff text, but isn't integrated into the mechanics of the game. So if there's anything that I would say, then that would be it. But I think when I design together with Daniel, we try to let the game kind of draw us along into what it should be, more than I think I'm looking towards specific designers. It's not something I think about.
And so how does this rank amongst Knizia oeuvre for you? Is this your favourite Knizia game?
I think so, yeah. Otherwise I wouldn't have brought it here. I haven't played all of them, but another one which isn't far from it, it also uses cards with numbers and colors, is Lost Cities, but definitely I prefer Schotten Totten over Lost Cities. But I'll play Lost Cities any day.
So I want to talk now about sort of your journey towards becoming a designer. So you played a lot of competitive GW stuff, and then you went on to work at GW. What did you do there?
I was back then it was called a mail order troll, and then they went company corporate and changed those troll names to just a mail order salesperson, I think it was called. They had just opened up a Northern Europe department that they were using to cater to all the Northern Europe countries, and they wanted someone who could speak Danish on the phone. So I applied, and they flew me over for the interview, and I got the job. I think I was 20 years old and left Denmark, and I ended up living there and working there for 2 years, where, without any doubt, my initial plan was to go there and actually become a game designer and design games for Games Workshop. And
so you didn't manage to achieve that. Did you attempt to?
I applied for a job opening, yes. My writing, my English was definitely not good enough. And at Games Workshop, I still think to this day, the designers of their core systems, they have in-house designers for everything. They have to be able to do the whole package, right? They don't have a designer and a separate person to write the background stories. It's the same person who takes responsibility for a whole army and leads that project through to completion. Not saying they do everything involved in it, but there's one person that needs to also take control of the artistic vision and the story behind it, etc., etc. Plus, I'm not sure I was good enough, but I had been dabbling. I think that's where I actually started game design, was doing different scenarios or campaigns and these kind of house rules for Games Workshop games, specifically Warhammer.
And what was it like working at GW, even though you were doing, what might be considered sort of a fairly mundane job? What was the atmosphere there like? Did people feel kind of privileged to work there? Were all the people who worked there gamers, essentially?
Not all people, but most people were. And definitely in the Northern Europe department where I worked, most of us were expats. So we didn't have a large network of people in Nottingham where the Games Workshop HQ was located. But we did have a work network, and it was a work network where you shared, for most of our sake, where you shared a hobby with the people you work with. So I really enjoyed it there. Not to mention, of course, all the other departments in Games Workshop. Everyone speaks English and also shared the hobby with them. So I was very happy being there, and I got to focus on my hobby and what was probably my main love back then, and make it into a career.
And so why did it come to an end? Why just 2 years?
I spotted that there wasn't any really chance for me to become a game designer there, and even if so, I could apply from back home. And then I went back home to university, something that had always been on my mind as well. Of course, now I took a chance, went there and see what happened. So I went back and went to university. I also think I knew a little bit that the department perhaps wasn't going so well, and right enough, I think even maybe before I left or soon after, they announced that by the year's end, like 4, 5, 6 months later, they were taking that Northern Europe department down again and packaging it in with some other pre-existing departments.
So I got Uli Blenman of Spielworks on the phone again, and he's going to tell you something about the classic game, Die Macher.
Yeah, Die Macher is a game about German politics, about German federal state politics. So in the game, you are a party leader of one of the 5 German major parties. So the game is for 3 to 5 players. So you can play with just 3 players, 3 parties. That's a minimum, and it's up to 5. And you try to win federal state elections in Germany. And the game is famous because has a legendary status, because the first edition is already from 1986, and at that time games of that complexity and of that length in Germany were really rare. The first edition was done by Bernd Brunhofer's and Kalle Schmiel's tiny company at that time, Mosquito Spiele. But the game has been redone in 97, and it was also nominated at that time for Game of the Year in Germany. It was reprinted by Hans im Glück at that time, and still it's Bernd Brunhofer's large German company, well known. And in the 2000s there was already an English language edition that is not highly regarded by Valley Games because rules were bad, graphics quality was bad, but the game is now out of print for quite a long time.
To find out more, go to spielworks.de. And so you went to university, but you've also worked in other capacities in the gaming industry, and you built up a sort of gaming network in Denmark. What else have you done apart from design in the gaming industry?
I have founded and ran a distributor of board games in Denmark and Sweden with partners in Norway and Finland. I think when I had the most different stock in my warehouse, I think I was carrying 2,000 different titles. And at the end, we also had Catan as exclusive in the North. I did that for 3.5 years, and part of it I also co-founded a retail store, a board game retail store in a shopping center in Copenhagen. Just at the board level, I wasn't involved in the daily operations of it or anything. I've been there for a few days, standing, being a retail employee, not something I've tried otherwise in my life, but with games, I love it. I love selling games, and I love matching people with a game that they hopefully will enjoy. Those, I think, are the 2 main things I've done in the board game industry. So distribution and the retail shop.
And then when did design come into your life? When did you think, firstly, when did you think I want to design games? And secondly, when did you think, oh, I can actually do this?
I think the first thing is design came into my life when I think about it a long, long time ago. Design came into my life when I started tweaking those Games Workshop games, when I started making house rules and campaigns, etc. Because it wasn't just like one change or 2 changes. We changed a lot of things and tried to balance it and rebalance it for competition and competitive play. And at some point, someone in Denmark put up a design competition. And basically, before starting it, and I thought I should be able to do this because I've been doing it for years and years and years in this other context and being quite good at it in that context. So what should be so different out here? Of course, there are many things that are very different. But I also then picked up like some easy projects, some games that have never been published, but I picked up some sports themes games where the first game I designed that wasn't just an adaptation or house rules on our own was a soccer or a football game. Because picking that up as one of the first projects that I had a lot of the rules predefined for me. Right, you know what the goal of the game is. It is literally to score goals, and that's getting the ball into a net and playing around other people, etc. So leaning against something pre-existing, I think, made it easier for me to get the ball rolling and doing new stuff.
So your next game then is a game that's incredibly well thought of, and this is Hanabi. So how special is the design of this game? And when you played it, were you wowed as much as a professional as a designer, as a professional as a gamer?
Absolutely. I think it's an amazing game. And again, all these games you're seeing here are games I'm rating 10 out of 10, except the one I don't rate at all. But what makes Hanabi so special is, again, like Schotten Totten, it's a very simple game. Again, it's cards with numbers and colors, and those are the main things. But what makes it so special is that it's a co-op where while you play it with the same group over and over again, or a new group over and over again, what you're doing is you're actually developing almost a language within that game with those people. And I think that's amazing. It means that you're, of course, beyond the alpha player problem, but it also means that you really have to try to learn together and understand together to achieve those great results.
And does this preclude you from playing with other groups, or does it diminish playing with other groups, or do you just embark on a new journey of discovery with new people?
I embark on a new journey of discovery, and I think that's also part of why I wanted to bring it to the cabin. Schotten Totten was to obviously play with my wife and everyone else that wants it, but if we're going into this apocalypse, finding a cooperative game that forces us to actually talk together and be aware of each other's strengths and weaknesses, etc., it could help us survive.
And so this was a game that was out for a couple of years before it got released in Germany, and then was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres and won the Spiel des Jahres. Does it surprise you that it took so long to take off, that it was quite a relatively minor thing until it won that award?
Not really. I think that if you're looking for fairness in the board game industry, you are probably maybe not misguided, but fooling yourself. You can have the best games out there, and if they're packaged slightly wrong, or the wrong artwork, or it doesn't it lands at the same time as some other mega hit, then it can completely fly under the radar, or even worse, it can die off. It's not something we as designers or even publishers are in full control of, or even us as the public, as gamers, are in full control of, because we also get swayed one way or another. So I think this happens all the time. I think there are great games out there that we still haven't seen rise to the top, even though they possibly deserve so.
So I want to move on now and talk to you about your design process, and specifically working with another person. So you design all of your games, as far as I know now, with Daniel Pedersen. How did you two meet, and how did you realise that this could be a productive, creative partnership?
And we met about a kilometer away from where I live in a climbing gym, a bouldering gym. And we still climb together 2 times a week. We're meeting tomorrow morning before we're working, and then going to the playtest meetup. We're meeting in the gym to climb. Of course, we also end up doing some work there and talking back and forth. But that's where we met. Acquaintances of acquaintances. Actually, I had climbed some years before that. I had climbed with his girlfriend's twin sister. So it's a small world. We kept going from there on, and we found out that we both enjoyed games. I introduced him to some games. He introduced me to Twilight Struggle. We met up in some other networks that were just starting in and around Copenhagen for game design, went to it together and designed our own independent games. And then we decided to go to Essen along with a lot of other people that were going to Essen, but it was growing, and now a lot of designers were also going. So we and actually Daniel and I, and the guy who is the managing director of the retail shop that I helped co-found, we took a car and drove to Essen together to try and pitch games. So we spent a lot of time in the gym and in the car and in the network talking together and realizing that we had something where we could possibly work together. And then we picked a project, decided to give it a go, and since then it has worked. We were happy with it. That first game was 13 days. And since then we've been designing everything together, and it's been like a gradual process of more and more time being put into it, and so step by step getting to also learn the small quirks each of us has. I'm still amazed that he doesn't bite off my head more often than he does when I'm an annoying jit.
And so do you have specific roles in the partnership? Is one person stronger at one thing, weaker at another, and you pick up each other's slack? Or is it just project dependent?
We do have some specific roles, but it's more practicality than it's anything defined, right? If we are doing quick prototyping, often we don't go about doing anything digital. We just draw it out on cards or on a board. Sometimes we even pitch games that are hand-drawn. And if anything is hand-drawn, Daniel is drawing it. He won't allow me to draw a stickman. He will hardly allow me to draw the number 1 because he thinks it looks like a 7 when I do so. So it's him doing it. However, when we're going to the digital phase, I'm a little more, what's it called? A little more, savvy and just familiar was the word I was looking for with some of the Adobe Shoot programs. So I end up doing most of that. I think the bigger thing where we probably supplement or complement each other is that, as when I said all the way back from me doing house rules for Games Workshop games, I think my main strength as a designer is to look at other games and saying I can do that better, or I would prefer, for my gaming experience, if this was slightly different, or that small thing there, I could make an entire game out of that mechanic and make it into something. So I do that as almost a derivative process, right? I look at what other things are doing and I get inspired by it. And I also play many, many, many more games than Daniel does because I have no children and he has two children. So he doesn't have the same time and freedom to do so as I do. And Daniel is more thinking about it sometimes even from an abstract or mechanical point of view and thinking out stuff out of the blue. So he also has more like ideas out of the blue, and often my ideas are closer to being finished because of course I'm not finishing it myself. I'm standing on the shoulders of someone else.
And so, looking at it, you could say, why design with a partner? You have to split all the money down the middle, which I assume is what you do. But what are the benefits of designing with a partner? Why? What makes up for that 50% of the money that you're losing?
First, there's something about just producing maybe twice as much, but I think more importantly, there's the quality. I think the big strength is that, for example, when we have a 2-player game or a game that can be played at 2 players, I don't have to wait for an outsider or someone in or organize something to playtest it. We even have a dogma where we try to, when we start work on a new game or a new product, we might have talked about it before, but when actually making any prototype to think of it, we have to try and play it the same day. So we can move really, really fast. And once you get to know each other and actually have a constructive dialogue where there isn't ego involved in the case where I want it my way, but I want it the best way for the game, then it means we can really move fast. Because even talking back and forth with someone as experienced that Daniel also is, will help us move past a lot of the things we would otherwise have to test. And then when we are in doubt, we can sit down, we can use 10 minutes to test that thing, and then we can move along. Doesn't mean we don't have to do external testing. It just means that we can jump far ahead in the process compared to only having to do external playtesting. We catch more mistakes and things before they actually happen.
How do you subsume the ego, though? How do you end up not becoming intransigent on something that you're just sure is right when they don't agree with you?
I'm really terrible at it. I often come out saying I think this is absolutely right, or I even say that can never work. And I've only grown more humble towards that as time goes on. I still end up saying it just because I still end up getting that gut reaction. But I also know that a simple test will often prove me wrong. So I think it's a combination of realizing that I can't know it, that I don't know it, and a combination of realizing that I know that Daniel is not saying any of this to exercise power over me or to be right about it, because we've done this so long. I know he's doing it because he thinks or wants to talk about why that would be a better solution. So it's not something we're stuck on me wanting it one way. We want it the best way for the game. I know that's what he wants, and he knows that's what I want.
So your next game, then, is a game you didn't design with Daniel, and it's probably the game you're most well known for. And this is Flamme Rouge. So was this designed before you and Daniel met, and is that the reason that it's a solely credited design?
But Daniel and I had met, but it was at the gym and in those community networks. We hadn't started designing games together. After that first Essen, Daniel and I both sold a game in the months after. So he also has a game that's only credited to him. So that's Gold Fever out with Stronghold in the US and from Lauterpili, same as Flamme Rouge. But yes, I picked my own game, and I really love it. I've played it. I think I've played it 17 times in the last week. I've been in Italy where it won Game of the Year, and I would be okay with playing it again tonight. I did play it yesterday for another 3 games. I'm also testing a 3rd expansion, but I really, really, really like playing it. I think it's a simple system that keeps surprising, and there's not this definite right move at every step of the way. And of course, in that box, I'm packaging in all those expansions. I'm getting everything with me. And finally, if I'm going into the apocalypse, I'd also like to take something that I'm really proud of and could also play with strangers that aren't even gamers and get them into it, but also just as a memory of the days of the past where the world wasn't going down the drain.
I mean, a lot of the way people speak about Flamme Rouge when they're being complimentary is they talk about how sort of streamlined it is, how there's no fat on the bones of the game, that it does exactly what it does with as little as possible. How long did that take? Or was it a very quick iterative process to get the game where it is?
I'll preface this by saying that sometimes we have been working on games for 5-6 years. There's one coming later this year that's been in the process since 2013. But Flamme Rouge was the first prototype I made was intentionally very rough because I expected to throw everything away. I just used other models and other tracks, etc. Put in crazy numbers to see what worked. The second prototype I made was 95% what you see in the final product. I tested it 100 times after that, but nothing really changed apart from like small stuff of how long should the course be, etc. But even the decks of the ruler and the sprinter were as they are today.
And why Flamme Rouge? Why bike racing? Do you have a particular love for it, or did you just think that it might be a good springboard for your mechanics?
I've grown up with the sound of Tour de France in my life and in my summer holidays because my dad always watched it. He used to be an amateur cyclist, so he's done some of that. I'm not sure I'd say I had a love for it, but I've actually grown a love for it more and more in these last 5 years. The 2 first games I made were never published, but they were sports games. So I think I was probably also just thinking about sport games when I made this 3rd prototype I made from the bottom up, and which is the one that you see here. So I think that was part of it. But more importantly, I was thinking about, again, this derivative process. I was thinking about Dominion and what I really, really liked in Dominion. And it was lauded as this innovation, which it is, but it is also just, and I'm saying just in air quotes, which no one can see because it's a podcast, But it is also just taking an existing element of Magic the Gathering and then building an entire game around that. And I figured, why couldn't I take an existing element from Dominion and build an entire element around that? And the element that I really, really enjoy in the base game of Dominion, the one that triggers my satisfaction, is the deck thinning, or the chapel where you get rid of cards. So I figured, why not try to make a game around that? And swings and roundabouts, for me, that logic led to cycling. I can get into the details about how that came if you want to.
I mean, what are you particularly proud of about Flamme Rouge? What are the elements do you think that fire people's imagination with the game?
I think part of what it does well, and part of what a game about something that also exists in real life can do well, is that it can activate people's imagination of experiences they've had in real life. So they can see the breakaway, and they can feel hope for the breakaway holding, but they can also see when the peloton comes chasing and just rams it down just before the finish line and overtakes him completely exhausted, right? So you can almost transpose your own experiences onto the game. And to do so, it has to be close enough to reality. It's always a simulation, but it has to be close enough to reality to not pull you out of that illusion, but to put you in it. And where there are gaps, your imagination should convince yourself that those gaps are there and it's meaningful still. And I think that's what I'm most proud of. It actually tells a story of cycling races, that is recognizable to people, even though it is just a game and a simulation. Of course, I'm also very happy that it is even, accessible to people who have no interest in gaming, because it is a very easy family game that can be played by this even down to 6, 7, 8 years old sometimes.
So I want to move on now and talk about something. And the origin of this is, we met at a convention in Berlin and we were having a walk around, and you said something that I found very interesting, in that it's not what people usually say. And we were talking about making money as games, and the accepted wisdom is that you don't make money at being a game designer. And you said to me that this just simply isn't true, that you can support yourself doing this job, and it's not just a hobby. What has happened? I mean, obviously you've made money, but what makes you think that? What makes you judge this whole thing differently to a majority of the game designing world?
I think a lot of people or game designers are obviously the same as me, started out amateurs, as they're not professional in their amateurism, but they're not doing it as a full-time job. And in doing so, if you make 1 or 2 games a year, then you really, really, really have to make those a hit for them to provide income that you can live off. And even so, that can be difficult. If you top that up with the fact that most games, they don't even get a reprint, then you're definitely not going to be making money. You have to get into the tens of thousands of games sold before it becomes an endeavor that you can live off, and probably even higher. However, the thing is, this the same with writing a book or being a musician or a band. It's difficult to break through, but if you do break through, and of course the money isn't as big as it is in books and music, but if you do break through, then you can get things that will generate you royalties, possibly forever. But even if it's just again in air quotes, for 5 or 10 or 20 years, then you can still do work in the years in between to layer on top of that and layer on top of that and layer on top of that.
And I guess what you were saying to me is that, what you've just said here too, is that there needs to be a shift in attitude towards what being a game designer is, rather than being a guy in a shed doing it as a sort of hobby. Having a professional viewpoint on the work itself. How does someone become the kind of designer that can support themselves in a viable manner?
First off, I don't think you have to become professional at all. I think that being in the shed and being a hobby designer is absolutely fantastic and it's great for a lot of people. But if that's where you're departing from in your analysis, that you can't make a living of it, then I think that's flawed. So if you want to make it professional, I think that what you have to do is make a lot of games. Again, we talked about Hanabi and why it suddenly came to the top. You cannot predict it. Even if you make the best game in the world, you can be unlucky that it's released just at a time where some huge company releases something of their bigger title and puts thousands and thousands of dollars in marketing into it, and it completely drowns, right? So it's each of the games you make is a small lottery ticket where you will get a variable amount of royalties from it. So to understand that and accept that as a condition of the industry, if you're working solely as a designer, you have to make a lot of games because you have to get a lot of lottery tickets. And then once in a while, hopefully all of them will generate a little income. Most of them will be worth the time you put into it, but some will not. And once in a while, you will find one of the ones that maybe will sell for 5, 10 or 20 years or the rest of your life. And then you can keep layering those small wins on top of the bigger medium wins and on top of the bigger wins and actually keep building your revenue stream. But you have to make a lot of games.
And so how has your process as a designer changed since you've gone full-time?
I'm not sure the process has changed so much because Daniel and I had been doing it for a long time before that. And in the years up to me going full-time, we had also even taken weeks off holiday where we just, instead of going on holiday, we sat down and tried this process of working on it again and again. Daniel and I, we meet 3.5 days a week at my place, and we sit around and we design games. So the main change is that there's more time for it and more regularity. But it has also meant that we have stopped doing as much extra work, outside hours or weekend work. We still do weekend work when we have tests or other things, but we try to now actually work when we have set aside time to work to actually compartmentalize it.
And so if someone were to come up to you and ask you one piece of advice about turning their dream of game design into a reality, a profession, what would that piece of advice be?
If I'm only allowed to give one piece of advice, I would advise people to go read the article or the interview, written one, that was released a few months ago on my blog, Sidekick blog on Board Game Geek, because there are lots of advice in that one. But again, I think that if it has to be one, make a lot of games, and number two would understand that you're actually making a product that someone has to earn money on. If you're just being a designer, you have to realize that you are going into a meeting with a publisher, and what you're really doing is you're presenting a business case. You don't have to flesh out the details of that business case, but that's what they're looking at. They're not going to say yes to publishing your game unless they think they can earn money doing so. Because if they don't earn money doing so and they keep not doing so, then they will go out of business. It is as simple as that.
So the next game then is a bit of a cheat, as it's a bit of a system rather than a game itself. But this is Commands and Colours. Are you a wargamer, or is this about as far as you go into the wargaming world?
Yeah, sorry if I cheated. I meant the Command and Colours Ancients game. I just really, really, really like it. It reminds me a little bit of Warhammer, which is obviously also a war game. It's a war game with models, and it's not placed in history, but it is a war game where you're playing as the general pushing troops around. So I think I've always been a war gamer and had an interest in it. And I wanted to put a war game on it just to rile you up a bit. It's a fantastic system, I think. It simulates a little bit of the fog of war, but more importantly, you have to push and pull. It doesn't have the you're losing slowly feature, because if you do, you can just get desperate and try to push for a big win and some lucky dice rolls. And I don't mind dice rolls. It's an accessible game that if I bring it to the cabin, I can play it for me again and again and again, because the randomization of the cards and the dice means that it's not going to grow stale into the same formations. It's something where, like Schotten Totten, I expect that I can keep getting better at it and delving into it. And as a slightly more complex game, it's something a lot more complex than Schotten Totten, something I can dive into and can really keep me interested, but still accessible enough that I can play it with everyone, because there's enough luck that even if I've played it 50 times, they still have a chance of winning.
And why this one? Because you have Memoir 44, my personal favorite, because I have issues, and this is my personal thing, I have issues with sort of real people, sort of killing real people at my behest. So I really like Battle Lore. I think the system is super solid, but why Commands and Colours Ancients? What is it about this particular one that beguiles you?
For me, it's the big difference is that Memoir 44 doesn't really have the influence of formations, which means that the intricacies of where you're putting your troops is not irrelevant, but there aren't cascading effects of where you're putting them. And in Command and Colours, you get benefits from being bunched closer together. And it's a slightly slower system where, of course, the Blitzkrieg kind of warfare from World War II warfare is a faster, more explosive kind of warfare. So it's more about formations, it's more about maneuvering compared to the modern Days of Wonder game, which to me is a big plus.
So I want to talk now about your future. So I assume for the foreseeable future, you're going to continue to design with Daniel. And what do you have coming up?
I have no plans to stop designing with Daniel. On the other hand, I think we're actually going deeper into our cooperation and taking it elsewhere as well. But I can't get too much into that now. We just had a big thing with a go-ahead last night, this morning. So I'm looking really much forward to telling you more about that later in the year. But I think we have 7 or so games under contract still to be released, some in 2020, and of course things can be delayed even beyond that, but also a few things coming this year. There's a very big release coming from a very big publisher later this year that I'm very excited about. That was a lot of...
Can you tell us?
I cannot... it is not for me to announce. It is for the company. That's the thing when you get with big enough companies, they want to control the narrative. It is a game about diving for treasure and pulling stuff out of a bag, and it's all very exciting. We're just getting art this week and last week, so starting to see how they're interpreting it, etc. Very exciting. And lots of other stuff and new publishers that we've signed contracts with for the first time. I'm very excited for Copenhagen, how it's going to be received this year. It's, yeah, all is good on that front and moving forward, hopefully.
So you've been nominated for a Kinderspiel des Jahres. How important is it for you? Do you see awards in your future? Obviously, there is the financial reward of winning one of the Spiel des Jahres awards. But is there something else? Is it a validation of who you are as a designer? Or is it not important?
I, like everyone else, love recognition from my peers. And I'm really, really proud of being nominated for the Kinderspiel last year. Especially with Panic Mansion. I think it's a fabulous little game that does what dexterity games can do so well, where it brings out the joy in you. But and of course, the money's always good. I'm trying to do this as a full-time endeavor, and the more I succeed at getting finances out of it, the more I can organize my life as I see it best fit, or even focus on the aspects of game design that I think I'm the very best at. So that's always something that comes opportunities with. I'm not wealthy in the way that I don't have to worry about money. Yeah, all of it, I guess.
And so you're designing a big narrative game. Is this something that is a departure for you? And what do you expect that game to be when it's all finished?
Out of this world is what I expect it to be. We actually had it signed with the publisher, but we couldn't quite agree on how to move forward and what was expected of each of us. So we pulled it from them amicably. We're still all friends. And we found another set of partners here in Denmark, Copenhagen, someone who specializes in the narrative aspects of it. We think we have a great system and found even possibly an innovative or unique system of doing this that hasn't been seen before, of presenting narrative and pulling people into a story visually and everything. Yeah, so I'm very excited about it, but I'm afraid that it will be end of 2020, assuming we don't get delays. And now it's actually something we're planning, or maybe even trying to do ourselves with them as partners, possibly with even a third party as partner as well.
So your last game then is your second war game on the list, and this is Root. So what's really interesting is this seems to be that Root is a coin game, but it's packaged as something else. Do you see this as ingenious or devious?
I don't worry too much about the label that it has from other. I've not played a lot of coin games, and the ones that I have tried haven't blown me away at all. So I'm not sure I see the exact comparison. I understand that it's the inspiration behind it, but when I'm evaluating Root, I'm evaluating it on its own merits. I think it's an absolutely amazing game. I think the design of it that Cole Worley has managed is fantastic. It's that core deck of cards. Even when you delve into it, there's so much story being told inside it. If you want to find it, you can also just play it as a game. But there's so much story about the life of the people in the not in the village, but in the woodland area. Not just the players and the identities they take on, but also the actors and people inside that story. I think it's ingenious and brilliant. And I really, really like it. And of course, it's also a game where you get to fight around, and it's a game where you have to balance each other and hit a little bit on the guy who's ahead and try to sneak away to your own victory. But I enjoy those games with a bit of luck and dice and fighting.
And have you played other of Cole Worley's designs? And do you think that he has a unique voice in the current industry?
I don't know if it's unique because I haven't really researched everything else that could be compared to it. My guess is that probably where he also came from, part of it is also from working with Hollandspiele and with Phil Eklund, where they probably have some voices that are not identical to his, but in that same vicinity. I have played John Company, and I think it's a really interesting, fun game. I think it also has some, as if you evaluate it purely as a game and also as a competitive game, I think it falls a little bit apart in some aspects. But as an experience, I'm happy to play it again. I'm looking forward to doing so, and I do own it, and it's not going to be sold anytime soon.
So, one more question then. So you're heading out to the cabin, you're driving along 88 miles an hour, and you go around the road, and the back door flies open, and 4 of your games fly out, down a ravine, into a river, and are swept away into eternity. Which game do you hope is sitting on the back seat?
Yeah, you're a mean man. I had forgotten about this question. I don't know. It's I don't know. The reason I didn't pick any games like chess or Go was that I was expecting those would be wide enough available that I could go find them in other houses. But I don't know. I'd pick Schotten Totten or Flamme Rouge is my guess.
You've got to pick one.
I'd probably pick Flamme Rouge because I think that's the one I would get the most play out and the most options of getting the table, because I can play it solo and I can play it up to 12 players, and I can play it as a campaign game or just one-off, and I can play it with non-gamers and gamers. So I think that's probably what I will pick.
Excellent. So if people want to get hold of you and see what you're up to, how would they go about doing that?
I am Sidekick Asger on Twitter, and I think that's probably the best place to go find me for any gaming-related stuff.
Brilliant. Well, Asger Granerud, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And if you want to suggest a guest, or you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on @5gamesfordoomsday on Twitter, or you can send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. You can give a rolling donation to help support the show at patreon.com/5G4D, or a one-time PayPal donation at the bottom of the website 5gamesfordoomsday.com. And if you fancy looking swanky, you could buy a t-shirt at tpublic.com/user/5gamesfordoomsday. And if I haven't had to limp away from the unforgivably loud sneezes and the jokes that need explaining, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.